Welcome, everybody, to All Saints Church. My name is Mike Kinman. I'm the rector here. My pronouns are he, him. It is fantastic to have you all here in the Rector's Forum this morning. It is a joy to have us all here. All Saints community is fueled by many things. It is fueled by the incredible gifts of talent and skill of everyone who is in the orbit of this congregation. It is fueled by a huge amount of the Holy Spirit, and it is fueled by the generosity of everyone in this All Saints community, far and near. So if you have made your pledge to All Saints Church for 2019, thank you so much. That is wonderful. And if you haven't, we need you to do it. We need to get all our pledges in by the end of December. We want to be able to do amazing things in the year ahead, and that takes all of us pitching in together to do it. And I want everyone here to have skin in the game and know that they're part of the All Saints family. So if you haven't filled out your pledge card, please get one of those. You can get them in the church. Fill them out. Just say your prayers. Have the conversations you need to have, and just dive in and pledge something that just makes you giggle. It feels so good to give that much. And we're going to have an amazing year together, so please do that. It is an absolute joy to have with us today Alexis Paige, and I'm going to read a little bit about you here. Alexis is named one of the 100 Trans Who's Who by Advocate Magazine. She supports Lambda legal attorneys throughout the country on an array of matters and at all levels of administrative, state, and federal courts. Currently, she's assisting in Lambda legal litigation challenging the current administration's discriminatory and arbitrary ban on open military service by transgender individuals. She's also assisting in a case on challenging a prison's what's called a freeze frame policy that bars a transgender inmate from accessing medically necessary transition-related health care. She's been doing this work for a long time. She assisted in the planning of Portland's first official Trans Pride March, planned a Meaningful Care Conference, which is a national LGBTQ medical conference, and also after the Trump administration rescinded important Department of Education guidelines that clarified for school that transgender students were protected by federal law. She fielded calls from students all over the country affected by the change, and she's contributed to articles, to the Lambda legal blog, gives presentations, participates in panel discussion, speaks at rallies on behalf of Lambda Legal, and this morning we got her. So will you please join me in giving an All Saints welcome to Alexis Paige. And so Alexis, thank you again so much for coming to All Saints Church.
Well, thank you very much, Mike. And also, just to let everyone know, I am very happy to say that the Missouri case to do with the freeze frame policy is one that we very recently won. And so
Fantastic.
Missouri will actually be changing their rules, and trans inmates are going to be able to get the medically necessary care that they need.
Well, and after spending a lot of the last 20 years in Missouri, I know that that was no easy thing to do, so congratulations.
Thank you.
I'm wondering, let's just start with the basics. There are many misconceptions about what it means to be transgender or a person of transgender experience. I'm interested, what are some of the most common misconceptions that you encounter, and what do you find that most people need to know?
Well, I actually think the area that causes the most misconceptions is that there's a lot more that people think they need to know than they actually do. There's a lot more that people want to know. People get very hung up on the medical aspect of transition, the physical aspect, wondering what steps is someone going to take? What steps have they taken? Have they had the surgery? Things like that. And really, because of that, I think the biggest thing I would hope people would know is just that there is no one story for transition. There is no one path that everyone who is transgender takes. We all take our own. We all take different steps. The medical aspect, I get why it's intriguing and why it's interesting, but it's much less important than the fact that this is just someone, where we're people, and that we're just trying to live our lives, go about our day. And I really think that's really all that people need to know. Is just that recognition of, it's something different that you may not get, but that doesn't mean that you can't still just be kind and caring and recognize everything else about a person besides just that one moment of their life where they were transitioning.
So, and what you're saying sounds so familiar to me to how so many marginalized groups are treated by the dominant culture in, first of all, assuming that there is some sort of agenda that is trying to be foisted on the rest of society. But really just a sense of what we really want to do is live our lives. And this is definitely not a legal question, it's more sort of a sociological human nature question. But what that makes me wonder is, why is that so hard? Why is it so hard for us to just let us live our lives?
I've wondered about that a lot too. And I think a lot of it is just that, we're humans, we're social creatures, we value being part of a group, we value normalcy, or what we perceive as being normal. And so when someone, appears to be different than what we consider the norm, when someone appears to be doing something that doesn't make sense to us, we either want answers as to why, or, sadly, some people get angry and upset that someone wouldn't behave in the way that they expect. And they're not looking at the fact that maybe the real thing is that not everyone is going to be the same. Not everyone is going to have the same sort of just image of what it means to be a person that you yourself are carrying. And that's okay.
We use the phrase or the term phobia a lot. Homophobia, transphobia, biphobia. And it seems really appropriate because so much of this seems to me to be about an irrational fear, but a fear that can be so powerful. And part of what makes this fear powerful is when it's held by the people who make the laws. Then it translates into ways that can seriously impact negatively real people's lives. And this really gets into your wheelhouse with Lambda Legal. First of all, can you talk a little about what Lambda Legal is and what you all do? Because it's an amazing organization.
Yes, definitely. So Lambda Legal, we are a nonprofit legal organization focused on advancing the civil rights of LGBTQ people and everyone living with HIV. So we do that in a number of ways. We do that partially through community education efforts, speaking events like this one here. We do that through public policy, working with legislators, helping to draft laws, helping to draft regulations. But the bulk of our work is around what's called impact litigation. And this has to do with basically the setting of precedent or how laws are interpreted, how they will be enforced. So we basically go into court and we try to either show, that a bad law shouldn't be there, or that this could be a good law, but it's not being interpreted, it's not being enforced properly. And that is really where the bulk of our efforts are.
So maybe this will get into sort of what some of the impact litigation that you're looking at right now. What are some of the biggest challenges legal challenges and obstacles that are facing people of transgender experience today?
Well, I think some of the biggest legal obstacles and challenges are, obviously things like updating the gender marker on our various ID documents. For example, over the past year, Lambda Legal has been litigating a couple different cases, one that was in Ohio, another one in Puerto Rico, to do with the fact that neither of those places were trans people allowed to update the gender marker on their birth certificate. And I know birth certificates don't come up that often in day-to-day life, but they're important when you're doing things like, signing up your child for school, applying for a mortgage at times, just moving and needing a new ID. And when those gender markers don't match, it leads to a moment where someone is having to, out themselves as trans if maybe they didn't want to or they didn't feel safe in that moment. It's leading to there instantly being questions, issues. I mean, I think an example would be for myself when before I had everything updated, I had moved and I needed to get a new driver's license because I moved. And so just the process of going in to do that involved, instead of just being a simple, here's my paperwork, here's the new ID, it was, not everything matches in the system. We don't know what to do. We don't know what we can do. This turned into a multi-hour event, and then I had to leave, go get a note from a doctor, come back, and then spend another few hours to get everything worked out to end up getting my ID. And that was just because even though everything else was updated, the gender marker there, in this instance, with Social Security didn't match. So that would be one just of those major life obstacles. But the other ones are a lot to do with discrimination, a lot to do with, being secure and having a workplace that you can go to where you're not going to be harassed, where you're not going to be fired because you come out as trans, where, you have access just to using a bathroom. Because, California is great with state laws, when it comes to protections. But it's not that way everywhere. And even here in California, there's the issue that while those laws exist, they're not always enforced. And, people don't always know that they are there to be enforced. And I would guess as the third thing, which is something I think is very major, and it's not just for trans people, but it's for a lot of people as legal obstacles go. Currently, right now, there is a large effort to push forward a view of the law and religion, and very specifically Christianity, that's stating these religious beliefs, that people are holding, give them the right to discriminate, that they are inherently at odds with being able to even just coexist with people who are trans or people who are part of the LGBTQ community, people who are different, that even going into a storefront for a cake is too far and it's too much. And that is by far and away the biggest legal obstacle challenge right now, is the way in which some people have chosen to be using religion, and more so Christianity, instead of being a shield against hate, they're using it as a cloak to protect hate.
So as a community of faith that believes that people of transgender experience, this is the heart of who Jesus is. Is that an aspect of always becoming. The very act we look at of incarnation is a transition experience, and so there is something holy about being of transgender experience. How can we, given that so much of the energy behind this transphobic movement legally is coming from other denominations that claim Christianity, what can communities like this do to help to change things?
Well, I think events like this are great, but I also think, getting out there in the streets, in public, in making sure that you are being a voice against this point of view, I think that is something that is so highly important to say that, these other denominations are not speaking for all of us. This is not what we believe. This is not what we agree with. This is not, you know, how we view, faith, at least our faith, to be used. And I think that's just the most important thing, to be out there and providing that counter voice, providing that voice that's saying, no, this isn't right. This isn't how things should be.
When the mainstream culture hears about the experience and life of transgender persons, most often the two most common things that I hear are talking about bathrooms and pronouns. Can you talk about those issues and what their importance is? And are there other things that we should be talking about?
Yeah, definitely. So to start with bathrooms, bathrooms are one of those things that they're very important just because, well, I'm sure we've all had that moment of being out in public and unable to go bathroom, unable to find somewhere to go. And, that's hard, that's challenging. And it's just that, it's about being able to be out in public, being able to be out in public places, to be in your work, for children, for youths to be able to go to school. Because if you don't have access to a bathroom, if you're so limited in where you can go and what you can do, you're having to head back to your own home, and it means you can't spend a day out. You can't, go do anything that would take you a far distance away. It prevents you from being part of the public sphere and getting to experience society. And so also with pronouns are so much about respect, but it's also about caring. I think, especially for people who are first transitioning or first coming out, that in those situations, someone just did something that was extremely brave, or was an act of desperation, or it was choosing to live life and to be true to themselves. And the matter of pronouns are about, like, if it's a friend, if it's a family member, if that's who they are, you're reassuring them that you still care. You're reassuring them that, you are still with them, that you accept them. And when it comes to just in public, it's just about, being respectful. I mean, if I were to, like, if we met and, you said, hello, I'm Mike, and I went, I think you're more of a Jeffrey, so I'm calling you Jeffrey from here on out. It's just, there's no reason to do that, and it becomes disrespectful, and it becomes irritating, and that sort of aggravation builds up. Now, just to say, I get it. I think everyone gets mistakes with pronouns happen, mistakes with names happen. I mean, we've all had someone accidentally misgender us once or twice just in life, or call us the wrong name or anything else like that. And so if you do that, just a simple apology, correct yourself, move on. If you had no ill intent, it's clear that you had no ill intent, and, it doesn't need to be a big deal. It doesn't need to completely derail a conversation or a moment. It can just sort of move on. So I just do want everyone to know that. Oh, sorry, and also, just for other things to talk about, I think the other things to talk about as far as issues affecting trans people that don't always get talked about are, well, two things. One, I know what I said at the beginning, but issues with medical care, access to medical care, access to treatment. And it's not just access, in the way of going to a doctor and having insurance. I mean, for the past year and a half, on and off, there have been running shortages of the generic versions of injectable estrogen for trans women. So this is necessary medication that, has had a running shortage, has most recently been for, the past few months now where people have been going in and being told, we just don't have it available because there's only one, factory making it, and, you can get the name brand, but that's going to cost you $220 and not be covered by your insurance. Or you can go without, or you can go talk to your doctor and maybe they can put you on something else, even if it's not what's working best for you. And just imagine if you have a medical condition and being told, oh, the treatment you're on that's working and is good and it's helping you, yeah, we are out of it. And now you need to do without, pay a huge price increase, or be on something that, you feel is going to be substandard.
And so just to give us an idea of, say this isn't covered by insurance, and I don't know what the current state of the Affordable Care Act is with medical treatment, what kind of money are we talking about here that people have to go through just to become themselves?
I mean, it very much varies because, as I said, transition is not the same for everyone. So for some people, when it comes to people medically transitioning, could be costing about the cost of prescriptions, which, without insurance can be, easily someone's going from spending, $300-400 a month, potentially. Then you do deal with that. There are people who need surgeries, need various operations, and once you're getting to that area when there's no insurance, the sky's the limit with prices. You're talking about thousands of dollars, tens of thousands of dollars or more, and it's very hard to give an exact number just because it is so variable. But that would be the thing you're talking about, people working for an entire year and not having money because they get told, oh, this surgery is going to cost you $20,000.
You said in California, legally, because we're a progressive state, we're probably in much better shape than, say, places like Missouri, like you were talking about. Are there specific legal issues that we're wrestling with here in California that we need to be aware of?
Well, I think one issue that's being wrestled with, just to stay on the topic of medical care, is the fact that, California has, pretty good laws regarding around transition-related coverage, medical care for trans people, but they're not perfect. There's still things left out. There's still insurance companies that aren't covering everything. There's still further updates and changes that need to be made, because it's great when, this insurance company or when Medicaid is willing to cover, these prescriptions and 1 or 2 procedures, but when your procedure and what you need isn't on this very small list, that still doesn't really help you. And so that is definitely an area for California. I think other areas are still dealing with issues like school, issues for youth and children. That's not just a California problem, that's an everywhere problem, but even in California, where there may be laws around bullying, there may be laws around harassment, those laws, they're just not good enough. They're not enforced enough. They have too much leeway. They have too much room for children to still be discriminated against, to still be harassed in school, to still be made to feel unsafe while just trying to have an education.
There's a really amazing book that I would recommend to anyone. It's by a Lutheran pastor named Austin Hartke. It's called Transforming the Bible and the Lives of Transgender Christians. Really extraordinary book. And something that he wrote in that jumped out to me. And Austin writes, "I believe God made all of me, gender identity included, and intended for me to be a transgender person who sees the world through a different lens. I don't think God made a mistake. I think God made me transgender on purpose," which is beautiful. And what it does for me is it reminds me that everyone, we're all made who we are. with unique and wonderful gifts to offer the world. And I'm wondering, can you talk about the gifts of being a person of transgender experience and how we can both as a church and a society embrace those gifts?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think there was a time in my life where this would have been a hard question, but luckily I've had years to, grow and just become more myself and just experience the world. But I think realizing that one of the biggest gifts is a deeper understanding both myself but of the nature of gender and the nature of sexuality, the nature of who we are. Someone who's trans, it's something that I have thought of and dealt with and grappled with, a lot. And it's something I know anyone who's transgender or non-binary is dealing with and thinking of and grappling with. But I think it's also something that people who are cisgender, so people who aren't trans or non-binary, also deal with and grapple with and don't really think of that, all of us are going around and to some degree enacting out, expectations on us based upon our gender. We are making decisions to do things that aren't necessarily true to ourselves, but what we think society wants us to say, how society wants us to act, be that men who are walking around feeling like they can't connect to their emotions, they can't display any sign of weakness, be that, women who are walking around feeling like, there must be a level of beauty maintained at all time, there must be standards maintained, there must be a proper behavior. You can't have access to your emotions either. You have them and you're emotional, but you can't be too emotional, at least never angry. These expectations that I would say for someone, who's trans like myself, and something I would hope as a gift for myself, but a gift for other people, is that realization that so much of that isn't who you are, it isn't who we are. These are just expectations placed on you. And it is okay to take a step and move away from those things, to be yourself, to, understand that sometimes society is wrong and you need to be true to yourself. You need to listen to that voice inside you, listen to that place inside you that's saying, this isn't how I want to live my life, or this isn't what's making me happy, and I choose to live, I choose to enjoy, and I choose to understand myself.
Thank you so much. We're going to be doing our first Transgender Day of Remembrance observance here at All Saints Church this Tuesday at 6 o'clock on the lawn. Can you talk a little bit about Transgender Day of Remembrance and why it's important and the unfortunately intense experience of violence that the transgender community continues to suffer?
So, Transgender Day of Remembrance is an annual event that was started many years ago, and it's to recognize all the trans people that are killed throughout the year. Because, and really that's why it's important. There are, many trans people who just aren't being recognized for when they die. Their lives are being cut short due to hatred or discrimination, that, someone being so angry at them just for them walking around as themselves, being so filled with transphobia as to lash out in such a horrific way to end a life. And it's about making sure that those lives are remembered. And especially in the sad truth is there are many trans people who even in death aren't actually recognized for themselves and for who they are, and are not, buried with their name or with how they would want to appear, so that even in that final moment, they're not being seen. So I'd say that's why it's important. It's giving a voice to those people, letting them be seen the way they would have wanted to be seen, and at least having one moment of being recognized for who they are. And it's also important for highlighting the issues of violence, the issues of the almost 30 trans people who were killed this year in various violent attacks that were upon them just for walking around the world as themselves and for no other reason.
Thank you. I think we have time for some questions for folks here. You've got two sitting over there. All right. So, and then, yeah, I think we have one person already over here. Susan, you had someone right over here.
I read a very disturbing statistic, and that has to do with the suicide rate among young transgenders, like 16 times the normal. Could you validate that for me a little bit? And then also, what can we do as a community to help with that?
Thank you.
Sadly, those statistics are true, that there's a very high rate of suicide and attempted suicide among transgender people and transgender youths. But there are also various studies and that have been shown, and from my experience and the experience of my friends, that it doesn't have to be that way. Just acts of acceptance, acts of kindness, reduce those scarily high rates and bring them to where they're in line with the rates for everyone else, which are still always too high and always a tragedy, but it's so much better. And it's simple things. It's, I don't remember the exact specific off the top of my head, but that, they've done a few studies showing that transgender youth who are just, allowed to use the name that they have chosen and have the right pronouns used for them by their families and in school, that those numbers greatly drop just from those two actions. And because that's the thing, it's not like people who are trans and trans youths are, suicidal or are in so much pain because they're trans. It's because of the fear of acceptance and the fear that is so great, and I think about, the hundreds of trans youths I talked to at the beginning of this year that is so great about they will never be able to have a happy life. They will never be accepted, that they will live their entire life alone, that their families will never want to see them again, and that they're having to choose between being able to be happy and being able to be comfortable with themselves, or being able to know their siblings, their sisters, their brothers, to talk to them, to have a roof over their head. And that's what causes that high number. So it's just about doing anything you can to make them know that those things aren't going to happen. They can be happy, they'll be accepted, they have a safe place.
And I'd like to actually just sort of jump in just for a second to expand on that in terms of having a safe place. For any of us, if we get to the point where we're considering suicide, and that can happen to anybody, the question is, do you have a place to go in that moment? Do you have a community of love? Do you have even just one person? And people of transgender experience, often part of that experience for them is the answer is no. And so your question is, what can we do? The first thing we can do as All Saints Church is do everything we can to be that community of love for everyone, including those among us who are of transgender experience. And that means into really intentionally looking at how do we as a community really embrace the full humanity and gifts of all God's children, including people of transgender experience. Also want to hold up the ministry of an amazing organization called the Trevor Project. And if you're interested in learning more about this, Kelly O'Phelan, our children's minister, has gone through the 50 hours of training, and she works with Trevor Project on a hotline. And basically, Trevor Project exists for LGBTQ youth, and part of what they have is a crisis hotline. And so what I would say is, if you're interested in this, in addition to the work we have to do here, support the work of the Trevor Project. If you want to become a counselor with the Trevor Project, do that. But really, Google it. It's an amazing organization. I don't know if there's anyone else in here who's worked with it, but certainly Kelly would love to talk with you about the work of the Trevor Project.
David Randall.
Closer to your mouth. Just closer to your mouth.
One comment you made struck me as quite surprising, the inavailability of estrogen injections. And it seems like such a generic product and something that would be widely available and would be consumed at a pretty steady rate throughout society. Is it that the particular form is used predominantly by LGBT people, or is it that you think there might be some targeting of that group that causes the shortage, or is it just a general problem in medicine?
Oh, I think part of it is a general problem in medicine. I know I've read and talked to people who worry about targeting, but I wouldn't think that at all. I think it's more just the current state of medical care in the United States is one in which there are certain medications, especially ones that have been around for a long time, that have very few places making them. And, you just get into cycles sometimes where things run short. There are, multiple reasons why people would be having estrogen therapy and using injections. I think one of the big things, though, that has made it so hard for trans people is for trans people, a lot of the medications we take are still considered off-label usage. And so that's usage that doctors recognize and prescribe, but it hasn't been officially recognized as the use of this medication is for treatment of these conditions. The FDA hasn't. And because of that, it creates a situation where insurance isn't necessarily covering everything, or will cover the generic version but won't cover the name brand version for you, because they'll say we aren't covering off-label usage when it's these ones that are more expensive. So it's about, I think the thing that would be most helpful is correcting that, getting the medical community to actually officially recognize that these medications they've been giving trans people for almost 60 years are being used for the treatment of gender dysphoria.
Thank you.
Could I do one real quick?
Go for it.
I was so intrigued and challenged, of course, by the fact that so much of the challenge for the whole LGBTQ community, but trans folk in general, is the weaponization of Christianity. And I have a question, but also a comment. And one of that is, whenever and this is your media training moment, you can get out your markers and write it down, that when we respond as people of faith to what we see in the media, if you start your response with, as a person of faith, that frames that question already as a response that puts it in antithesis to those good people of deep faith who have a completely ridiculous understanding of what Jesus would do. So, yes, I'm on record with that. And then my question on that is, if we wanted to be more proactive in our advocacy, are there any particular places where you feel like our voices might have the most leverage, maybe in this cycle? We're sort of post-midterms, we're now back into a long haul. What would be your advocacy suggestions, if any, for us?
Well, I think that these suggestions, that there are a number of them. One, I think, obviously, when you hear of protests, when you hear of marches, be out there, but also in social media and online. I know sometimes we, will ridicule and make fun of being like, oh, someone's just posting a comment on Facebook. But those things are actually powerful because, gosh, I heard something recently about how the current time we are in is we are having a battle to define what is normal. And is normal going to be, how things used to be? Is it how, there are groups of people who want to be in which, hatred and discrimination is a normal part of the day, in which there's only a small set of people who are living, the right way? Or are we going to be a society that is about embracing love and acceptance and caring? And if we want to be that society, we have to constantly have our voices heard. We have to constantly be pushing forward that message of acceptance and fighting to say, no, these actions, these words, your insults, all that isn't normal, that isn't right. And even on social media, because that's the new platform, that's the forum that everyone talks about. I would also say, just as anyone who would be interested in specifics would be to go on to Lambda Legal's website and sign up for our newsletter, because then we'll keep you updated about events that are going on. We'll keep you updated on news stories, and also, just because I know my work would be very happy for me to say, please feel free to donate to Lambda Legal if you are on there, and also to donate and support other organizations, places like the Trevor Project as well, because there's another way we all make a difference, by keeping organizations doing good work, doing that work.
And what's the Lambda Legal website?
And that would be lambdalegal.org.
Okay, so lambdalegal.org, and people can click and donate on that?
Yes, they can.
So maybe that's something that we go do, is just support the work of Lambda Legal. Mm-hmm. And thank you so much. Can we give Alexis a round of applause? Thank you so much for being here. And thank you all for being here.